This is how I do my antler mounts that are not big enough for a shoulder mount. I'll take you through it step by step. I always try to incorporate the projectile if I have it. And this one, I tan the hair on his forehead, put it on there. There's another one. Like this one was a muzzleloader deer, so I got the sabot and the type of bullet I used. And this is just a fake leather. Real leather will crack over time, so it's up to you what you want to do. This is another muzzleloader deer projectile, the primer. Fake leather again. And this is a shotgun deer. I found that piece of wood in the city dump. It's a piece of cedar. All I did is varnish it. No stain on it at all. I knew it would turn out pretty neat. But yeah, I'm going to show you how I do that. So the first thing I do, obviously, is get the antlers off the skull. And you're going to want to make your cut as flat as you can and as square as you can. And then you're going to let it set. You're going to get all the meat off that you can first and let it set for about a week. And what will happen is inside his cavity here, there's going to be a real thin membrane that separates the brain from the skull, and that will start to dry up. And if you catch it at the right point, you can pull the whole thing out in one piece. Same with the membrane that's over the bone. I did not catch this in time. It's still pretty much stuck to it. I got a lot of it off, down to bare bone in a lot of places, but this is what it looks like. It's just a thin, it's transparent, but you got to get that off. And I use pliers or razor, super dull knife. There's no edge on this at all. And that really keeps it from digging into the bone so bad. As you can see, I got some fuzzy stuff to clean up here. And I'll probably use sandpaper on that. And we'll go to the next step. So here it is all cleaned up. Took sandpaper, got the rest of that membrane off. So now what I got to do is I have to cut a thin piece of plywood to fit inside of here. And what I'll do is I'll run some screws from the front in these shallow dips here. I'll run a screw through there and through there into that thin piece of plywood. What that does is that secures the plywood to the antler. Before I put my piece of plywood in though, I'm going to take this stuff and I'm going to fill this. Then I'll put my piece of plywood down. I'll already have those 2 holes pre-drilled. I'll put my plywood down and I'll run those 2 screws into that piece of plywood, and then I'll cut the end of the screw off. Once that's done, you're going to let that dry, and you want that plywood to be almost as flush with the back of this as you can get it. The further this way that it is, up, the better it's going to be for when you go to screw into it to mount it to your base or your wood plaque or whatever you're going to mount it to. Once I'm done with that, I'll take some more of that spackling, this stuff, and what I'll do is I'll start at the high point here in the center of his head, and I will feather it out to the edges. So all this in here will be filled. And what that does is when you go to put your cover on, either your leather or your fake leather or whatever you're going to use, what that does is it gives it a smooth surface to be stretched against. Okay, so now I got my little piece of plywood cut. And you want it to fit kind of snug. If you wanted and you had a little belt sander or a disc sander, you could form all these edges right to his cavity there. I'm not going to, because I found that it doesn't really matter. Once you get some screws in this thing and get that back filled, it's not going anywhere. So depending on how you cut this, the skull cap is going to depend on the angle of your antlers, whether they'll be like that against the wall. I like doing them like this because I want as much contact with my mounting surface as possible. So mine are kind of tipped down. So I am for sure going to put a screw up in here, and then I always put a screw down here and down here. And what that does is when I go to put this on the wall and attach it to my sticks or plaque or whatever, that gives me this whole area in here to put some screws in to this piece of wood from this direction. So I'll have the one up here coming out this way, and then I'll have two in here coming out this way. That whole area there, I'll be able to attach the antlers to whatever I'm going to put on the wall. So when I put these, I'm going to dry fit it first. When I put these screws in, I'm going to drill a hole completely as large as the screw. So the screw will go right through the bone. Same down here. That way it won't split the skull. And then what I'll do is I will pilot these three holes so that I don't split the wood. But I want the screw to have good contact with this wood. Okay, so I have my holes drilled. And what I did is I left a piece of plywood in there so that when this bit pokes through the bone, it'll make a mark on the wood. And that's where I know to pilot my holes. Like this. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take that stuff and you're going to compress it into this void, into all areas of it. And you're going to take your piece of wood and you're going to smash it down on there, hold it in place, run your screws through the front, and then you're going to run them into that wood, and they're going to stick out, and you're just going to take a pair of nippers and cut them off. Okay, screws are in, stuff squishing out, that's what you want. And then what you want to do is take this stuff and just completely fill that void. Make sure it's in there real good. Okay? Do that all the way around. Then you're going to take some nippers and cut these screws off. You don't need these that long anymore. Okay, so now it's filled. I'm going to do after that, after it dries, which is going to take a while, I'm going to sand that. Contour it so that it's smooth and symmetrical. And then we'll start wrapping it. So here it is sanded. You can see some really shallow voids in here, but it's fairly symmetrical. I'm not going to fill those because they won't matter anyway. You won't even notice that. And then on the back side, it's just like that. Because what I need is, when I fold my material over, especially these eye sockets here, I'm going to need room to do my folds and stuff and have a place to tuck it. And then back here you'll have like 3 or 4 layers of material as you fold it and staple it and glue it. I just use hot glue, works the best, and I trim clear up around the antlers if I can, and then I use like a thin piece of jute. It looks like twine, but it's not twine. It looks like old twine. I use that under the burl here, and that fills up any gaps and stuff. Looks pretty good. Looks more old school. Went to my fabric store, which is Hobby Lobby, and they did not have my tan color anymore. They have brown and black and some kind of maroon color right now. So I ended up getting this. It's a 1/4 of a yard, $2.24. So it's like 12 inches across and like 4 feet long. I could do antlers in that forever and ever for $2. It's got a fabric back to it, like I said. It's a faux leather. It won't deteriorate like leather. Leather's neater, I do know that, but it costs a lot more. I'll show you what this looks like once I get it covered. It is a long process to trim around this and to make it all fit so that it's halfway smooth and looks good. Well, there it is, wrapped. It's pretty good stuff to work with. The back side is where you fold it all under and everything. And then what I do is I cut out a big piece of this to just glue it all together. Mash it down. When you wrap your antlers, you want to do it on the furthest point back behind, so that when this is on the wall, it's going to look clean. You know what I mean? So I went out to Mom and Dad's yesterday, and they have walnut trees. And this is the stick. Dead stick sticking out on a great big live tree. It's got some pretty good character to it. This end is all covered with moss from about here on down, so I'm not going to use that end. But I like the splits, I like the holes. I gotta have the fork. Okay, so I got my 3 pieces of wood. I got my plywood cut. You want it to go at least halfway the distance of the two outside pieces. This is going to go on the back side, and I'm going to screw to this one, and this one. Usually I do 2 screws. This one will get 1 because when I go to put my antlers on, there'll be 2 going through that center, through this center stick into my antler base and that piece of plywood that I put in the beginning. Okay, so how I put this on, I put a screw here and a screw here first. And this is walnut. I mean, you look at how old this stick is, but this inner core is hard as a rock still. Really good wood. Anyway, yeah, I put those 2 in. Then I took the center one, made sure that it still fit, and I ran 1 screw in there to hold it in place. Then I did the other 2 corner screws, tightened them down good so the stick and the plywood are against each other, solid. While that screw was in there, I drilled this hole through the plywood and the center stick as large as the screw. And I took a long screw, put it in the hole, and marked my antler base, the skull, and got that centered, and then ran the screw in. You got to be careful not to use too long of a screw or you'll come out the front of your skull there. You don't want to do that. You got to start all over with that. And then I pulled the short screw out here that held the stick to this, drilled the hole out, and ran a long screw into that, into the base that we had put in the skull cap at the beginning. And as you clean these, or as you handle them, the dirt and stuff comes right off of them, usually. These really whitened up quite a bit. I did incorporate the case head and the bullet, and I ran a screw into the back of the bullet, cut the head off the screw, drilled a hole, and I got epoxy in the hole right now setting up to hold that bullet in place. But that's, you get a general idea, that's what it's pretty much going to look like on the wall. Now I just got to find somewhere to put it. And that won't be too hard. Oh, and on the back here, I used picture hanging wire. Just some good wood screws. You might want to pilot your holes if you're using walnut or oak or any other kind of hardwood. Hardwood works the best. And hardwood usually turns out like this if it sits around for decades. It splits like that, and it's still solid. Not right there, it's not, but you can see that inner core is still good. It's crazy how long wood will stick around. But yeah, that's how I do it.